Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Today I'm here with Bruce Nachsin. He fell into the acting world after an ill-advised foray into the world of fine woodworking revealed very specific and life-threatening allergies. He's been writing and producing for 11 years and starting with his original attempt to create a personal film school in the guise of his comedic 10-episode web series, Under the Doghouse. It was out of his time as a member of Fred Willard's MoHos that Bruce wrote a sketch that would go on to be the impetus of Dark Specter, and a series was born. His other works include Approvo, Nothing Personal, Searching for the Words, and his award-winning directorial debut, Lunchtime is Over. Bruce is a man with only one real skill that likes to masquerade itself as many. I actually think, Bruce, you have many talents, and I'm so glad to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you for starting off by buttering me up. I deeply appreciate it, Tammy.
You're very welcome. What inspired you to become an actor and later a podcaster? You alluded to it a little bit in your bio, but I'm curious to know more.
I had crushing, debilitating, life-altering degrees of shyness. I was a very picked on child. I had the misfortune of weighing about 280 pounds around 11 years old. And as you can imagine, the world is not very kind to a child who looks like that. So even though I managed to lose my weight before I got into my late teens, I still had this self-image of myself because you carry that. And when I got into my 20s, if there was one person there, I could talk to them, provided it wasn't a girl and I wasn't forced to talk to that girl. If there were two people there, maybe I could talk to them. If there were three people there, if I'm pulled into the conversation, sure, I'll participate. Beyond that, I would mentally shut down. So I really wanted to get over that. I did manage to get a girlfriend, and she had suggested that I try community college just to figure something out. So I wanted to go into fine woodworking because I love working with my hands. I love building. I love creating. So working with my hands is a great degree of satisfaction for me. That's how I have fun. Doesn't sound great. But anyway, I wanted to take up fine woodworking, and I immediately had health issues with it. So I needed to transfer into something. And I figured, okay, I don't know what to do. Why don't I go into the communication track? Why don't I take some acting classes? Hopefully it'll take this shyness away from me. It'll just take the edge off of it. And then I got into a play called Zeus Story, which Edward Albee, and it's a two-person play where this gentleman who is just in the park trying to have a nice day is met by this guy who has a whole bunch of personality issues that he just inflicts upon this poor man on the bench. In practicality, it's a lot of really, really deep, embarrassing things. And I was that character, Jerry, and I had to deliver this into an auditorium filled with hundreds of people for 2 weekends, plus matinees. And after that, whether internally I might be shy, I have no problem talking to people, going up to people, and just now presenting who I am. So it worked.
That's wonderful to hear that you were able to find an outlet in that way and then turn it into something that you're passionate about.
It certainly made life a lot better for me because before that, the idea of talking to people, I guess it was born of a self-esteem thing. Not that I didn't have a strong family support. I had the kind of mother who would always say that I could do whatever I wanted to do and had a very high opinion of both my intelligence and my personality. It just was that whole body image thing.
Yeah, it's amazing how things from our younger years really shape us as adults.
I like to say that no matter who I am or what I am, always behind these eyes, there's that 280-pound 11-year-old driving the ship that is me. There's a metaphor for you.
Yeah. But things have worked out well. You've done acting, you're doing podcasting. Can you tell me more about your podcast?
Why, thank you. I would love to talk about my podcast. Podcast is called The Fittest Fat Kid You Know. And it's what it is it's my attempt to use the ups and downs of my fitness journey, of my roller coaster of weight loss, gain, currently working back on the loss again, as a lens to help other people focus on the trials and tribulations of their weight loss journey. I think a lot of people who have difficulty losing weight or getting to the gym or working out or just really focusing on their health, a lot of times it feels like a personal failure. And it's kind of the last prejudice you're allowed to have in society. We're all allowed to look down on people with weight issues and nobody thinks twice about it. So you feel very isolated and closed off. And I wanted to give a forum for people to get information, how to help themselves, but also where they're not judged and where it's not some guy who has 4% body fat and who maybe has a slice of cake per year because they don't have food issues whatsoever. It's hard for me to relate to somebody like that. They don't know what I'm going through. I wanted to present that information from somebody who's in the trenches, who deals with the same thing. And that's where the Fittest Fat Kid You Know comes from. Pre the pandemic, I was on a prior weight loss journey. I had gone from 270 down to 180. I was working out 6 days a week because I get really into working out. And then the pandemic hit, the gym closed, we all got isolated, and I was fine until 9-10 months later. And suddenly a physical ailment happened. I got massive allergies that returned, and they haunted me for about 10 months. I gained 78 pounds because at some point I just couldn't focus. The podcast was a way of trying to hold myself accountable and to create a break stop so I could build myself back, which I'm currently doing. I got back up to 258. I'm now down to like 235, and it's only been 2 months. I'm on my journey, and that's what the podcast serves. And we talk I'm talking a lot about my podcast. On this podcast, we talk to people about their struggles, or we talk to somebody who is a fitness expert on what they recommend, or we talk about, here's what this diet is. I personally do keto, but that doesn't work for everybody. I have a friend who has a lot of success on the Mediterranean diet. So I present those information. Maybe it's Zone for you. Maybe it's South Beach for some reason, who knows? But I want to cover these topics and get people good, solid information that isn't either too technical or just pulled out of my ass. Mm-hmm. So that's the podcast. And I've been enjoying doing it because God, do I love the sound of my own voice.
Well, you've got such a buttery voice too. You really do. It's made for radio.
Why, thank you. And I'm not even doing the proximity effect. Right now, I'm doing the proximity effect. Hello.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful that you've been able to find success with your podcast and have that outlet. And, you said you bring on a lot of different guests and you show different diets and different lifestyles. As we come into a new year, what are some of your goals for that?
To continue to find my voice. So last week was episode 10, which, like a little inside baseball, there's this wonderful little phenomena called podcast fade. You got the idea to do a podcast. You're going to do a podcast. Oh my God, we've got something to talk about. Tammy, let's get on it. And then you don't get listenership out of the gate. It's a lot more work than you realize. And by episode 6 or 7, you're wondering why you do it. And generally speaking, most podcasts are gone before episode 10. So I've got in the can episode 14, which I recorded this morning. I want to show the ups and downs. My first goal is to just be very honest, and present the realities of what I'm doing. So when I slip up, I present the reality of it. I'm trying to find my voice, as buttery as it is, and you've made my day. You've just made my day, Jen. But to refocus on not my voice, back to my voice, when I first started out, I had an idea of what it would be. It's no longer what I thought it would be. There were key touchstone moments of the podcast that turned out to be meaningless. what I've discovered is I seem to be a decent interviewer. I ask interesting questions. I didn't know I was going to do that. I would like to develop that more. I'm trying to figure out how to get my personality when I'm the interviewer as opposed to the interviewee. Because when I'm the interviewee, I'm a lot more free. I'm a lot more flowing. I'm funny. I think I'm charming. I hope I'm charming. Are you charmed? Have I charmed you yet?
Totally.
Great. Hopefully, listeners, I've charmed you too. And if so, send money to, later. I'm still trying to find the balance of getting good information, asking good questions, listening and doing all of that, while still not being, today on the news, I'm talking to you in a serious tone because I would like you to feel the gravity of what I'm saying. I'm getting better at that, but I don't think I'm 100% there. So that's another goal. And of course, the biggest goal, the obvious goal for just starting out podcast is listenership. I feel I've got a very good product. I feel I have very good information, and I feel like I present it in a way that other people aren't necessarily capable of. I also don't have a social media following. I'm not good at social media. And so I don't have a reach. And without the reach, I drop a podcast and the 20 people who listen know it's there. And beyond that, I'm having difficulty getting it out. So in the new year, I would like to get it out because this is what I want to do. I want to communicate. I want to be podcasting. And I want to make it as something of a living without making the people listening and marketing to them and stuff like that. But I would like to be a professional broadcaster at this point.
And you've got such a wonderful story to tell and an important journey. And especially as we move into the new year, a lot of people decide that's a great way to hit restart and refresh on their goals, usually fitness based. So I think that there may be a lot of people who flock to podcasts looking for answers, looking for suggestions. And yours sounds like a really wonderful, well-rounded option to choose.
The thing that I really try to get across with the podcast goes a little something along like this. It's not, my tagline is hold yourself accountable, but do it with kindness and understanding, because everybody wants a quick fix in their fitness. You look at yourself in the mirror and you don't like what you see. And then you look on Instagram and it looks like there's a world full of people with 2% body fat. And it looks like that it was easy for them. And it probably wasn't, but it doesn't matter whether it was or it wasn't for them. They're not you. You are an individual. And when it comes to fitness, there's no one size fits all. What I do doesn't work for you. You have to figure your stuff out, and you can get advice and you can try things, but you have to tweak it. And that is a process that takes time. So everything with diet and fitness takes time, much more time than you'd want to realize. So the new year creates a lot of hope and then disappointment, because everybody gets their gym membership. They're going to go to the gym and they expect to lose 20 pounds in a month. And you can lose 20 pounds in a month. The downside to that is it's about 50 to 75% water weight. And the moment you stop doing whatever it is you're doing, is the water weight just comes back, because the water weight doesn't matter. The point being, it's going to take you 4 months, 6 months, a year to really get into the groove and create the lifestyle you need to actually get your fitness in shape. But we're so pre-programmed by media and social media, and just by societal expectations, that we don't have the patience for the time it takes to take the journey. And more than anything, I want to slow people's expectations down so they can take the journey, because we get into the cycle of, oh, I'm going to do it. Oh, it doesn't work. And nothing's ever going to work. So that's the hope of the podcast.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing how, that progresses in the new year, and that you've gotten past the dreaded seven episode slump. So that's wonderful already. That's a milestone.
Thank you. They even sent me like a little Podbean sent me a little notification, like, here's your certificate for getting past 10 episodes. Cha-ching.
Nice. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and get more into who is Bruce.
Who is Bruce?
That's right. So what is a piece of creative advice that you ignore and something that you always follow? And it could be for writing, podcasting, acting, anything that you do.
If there is one thing bit of advice that I would give somebody, especially when it comes to creative, we're all afraid of failure, and we view failure in a zero-sum kind of way. Either I've succeeded or I've failed. And a lot of times people do not do things they want to do. They do not try things they want to try because they may fail. It's that fear of failure that prevents them from doing it, because if you never try, the potential of success is always out there. You could always have succeeded. You could always have been the great singer, the great musician, the great actor you wanted to be, but you just didn't try, but you could have been. Where if you make the attempt, you succeed or fail. Embrace failure. Failure is your friend. Lose at everything you can possibly lose at. That doesn't mean you're going to always lose, but loss in most cases is not zero sum. It's not that this project failed. I didn't do what I wanted to do. In that failure, there were so many lessons, so much you learned, so much development, so much success that you just don't see it as at the time. There is not one thing I've done that, if I were to be honest with you, and I'm not going to be, if I were to be honest, wasn't a failure from my point of view. Under the Doghouse, a massive failure. Dark Specter, the first one didn't matter, it was just a skit. But Dark Specter 2, big failure. Lunchtime is over, massive failure. These things did not become the things they were in my head. There were lots of problems with it, things that if I wanted to turn in on myself, I could just sit there and grind on. They were all failures, but they were successes. They were amazing successes. Who in their right minds goes from, I don't know how to produce things, I don't know how to make movies or TV shows or anything, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a 10-episode web series, multicam, with 8 different locations, a crew of 40 people, a cast of 30 people in 3 weekends. That's what I'm going to do, because that's how you learn. That's stupid. You don't do that, but you do it. And then you learn a lot. And I got all 10 episodes done. Are they great? Well, no, but they are there. They exist. And they're not terrible. And I learned a lot from it. Embrace the idea that you might fail. Become comfortable falling on your face, because it's not the fall on your face, it's the picking yourself back up. It's cliched and nobody wants to hear it, but that's the biggest thing. The people you see who seem to be overnight success have more scrapes on their knees than you can possibly imagine. It just looks like it was easy for them. It's not easy for anybody. And it's not going to be easy for you. But if you don't embrace your failure, you're just going to have regrets. So fail often, fail hard, and learn how to embrace it. The best thing in the world I ever do is fail.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, you don't know whether something's going to work out, or what new talent you could develop, or new passion that you could find if you don't just try something.
Yes.
Unless you have allergies to it.
Oh God, yes. Turns out he could overcome anything except cheese.
Sort of on the topic of failure, would you mind talking a little bit more about some barriers that you've had to experience to reach where you are in your career?
Probably the biggest barrier that I've had to, and still have to face, is I'm an unknown quantity, and I fall between types, and I don't fit into anybody's preconceived notions. So it's very, very hard for me to find a team, to find support. I've never had much success with finding an agent. I've had them numerous times, but it's always resulted in either me not going out for anything, or me not, I've always had to make sure that I'm clarifying, and this is why I do a lot of my own projects. It's me trying to clarify how I see myself versus how an agent might see me, or how someone sees me as saleable, because I view myself as what would be a character lead. Clearly, I'm not a leading man looking person, but I'm also just not the guy who's going to be the crazy neighbor. That's a hard concept to get across in an industry that needs to package you and box you and present you in just that way. So I continue to struggle with that. I think that's my biggest challenge. And then the pandemic hit, and that would be my that had been my second greatest challenge, because whatever little momentum I had built, any momentum that I have ever built just went away completely. So we were going around the film festival circuit with Dark Specter, and then Lunchtime is over, and we were winning awards. I have a whole bunch of awards up on IMDb for all the good it did. And we had this series that we wanted to pitch for Dark Specter, and we had a Bible and we had a presentation, and no way to get into the room because just there wasn't that person on the team, because we didn't know somebody who had that kind of networking connections. And we were working on it, and then everything shut down. And that kind of went to some degree as a fatal wound at the time for that project. So I guess that would be the things that I found the most challenging, is getting off that initial step. It's like with the podcast, getting the listenership. It's not that what I do isn't good. It is, and I know it. Modestly do I know how great I am. But I can never quite find that person whom I can connect to and work with and help me along with the journey. So it's very much a in the trenches slog. And the little progress I made then got taken away because of totally unforeseen circumstances that devastated so many people. And to be fair about it, in much greater ways than just like, oh, I couldn't pitch my series.
Yeah. I mean, we all deal with, barriers and setbacks. And do you think that you'll ever consider pitching the series again, or would you maybe just film a new series, something different?
I hope so. Right now, because of the weight gain, I'm not as inclined to get back in front of the camera at the moment. I want to get my fitness in order, partially because I don't want to spend the money on the marketing materials. Like, I got these incredible headshots, these wonderful headshots that not only were amazingly gorgeous, but they do look like me. They looked like me at the time at that weight. I don't want to spend that money and go out looking as I do now, as heavy as I am, and the investment in clothes and the headshots and then the printing, though it's more digital now, so that's not the big deal, but there still is a big expense to it. And I'm desperately trying to work my way away from how I look now. So that'll be a very temporary thing. And what I would get cast at now would just sort of be the fat guy, and I don't want to do that. So I've put that energy into the podcast, because I think in the modern age, part of the way you are marketed is based on what your social media following is, for good or ill, which I have none, to be perfectly honest. If I can get the podcast happening, I can then have a listenership. If I have the listenership, I can leverage that when I eventually do get new headshots and go back out and try to re-enter the acting realm. I will then have a built-in audience that I can leverage towards an agent and the casting. So that's where the energy is right now.
Do you miss acting, or do you feel like podcasting is filling that creative hole in your life?
That is a great question. It's an entirely different animal. It is it is to some degree fulfilling a creative thing, but it's a different kind of creative. I'm not with the podcast. It's more of a reality-based thing. I'm presenting reality, I'm presenting information, and I'm presenting a degree of humanity. With the acting and with the writing and the producing, I am creating worlds. I am playing in a sandbox. I am a kid again, and I have got my sword, and I have got my gun, and I have got my rope to swing, and I'm practicing stunts. It's an entirely different thing. So the podcast does feed a creative urge, but it's not the same one. It's entirely different. And I do miss it. There are people who are trying to just kind of like have play reads and stuff like that. And I tend not to go out for them, because at this point, the podcast that I do, I put a lot of work and effort into it. So an episode of mine takes about an hour and a half to record, but I put in anywhere from 10 to 15 hours worth of post-processing to it. So, and then I've got the videos to do. So there's a lot of work for the podcast. Instead, I'm trying to encourage, like, I have a friend who really wants to do his demo reel, and he wants to write his thing, and he wants to do his podcast. So I'm trying to help my other creative friends in my periphery who might be stuck on something, with my basically forcing them to get done what they need to get done. I do really miss acting, and I would love to get back to it.
Sometimes you have to go forward and create new stuff, even though you really love the old stuff. And it's hard. It's hard to set it aside and move on and start something new sometimes.
There's a weird emptiness that comes from the end of a project that I think people who don't create don't quite understand. So the amount of work and effort it takes to get one of these things done into the finish line is amazing. It's 10 minutes worth of material. It's 10 minutes. So for the outside viewer, that's their investment in life. But for you, there was the pre-planning stage, and that could have taken anywhere from weeks to months. Then there was the production stage where you did the work, and that could be weeks. And then there's the post-production stage where you refine it and you make it. And that can be anywhere from months to years. So this 10-minute thing is 2 years of your life. And then you release it and it's gone. 2 years, this was in your head, in your heart, for at least large periods of every day. And then it's gone and you're just like, well, what do I do? Even if there's something new, this thing is gone. You've birthed this thing and all of that emotional energy hasn't left. The fact that you've thrown it out into the world doesn't change the fact that your entire psyche has been built in nurturing this thing. And that stays with you. And it's such a depressive, low thing. When I released Dark Specter, it wasn't a feeling finally after so many challenges to get it out. Dark Specter 2. I had a depression afterwards. It was just because it was gone. I had worked so hard on it and now it was gone. And yeah, there was other things I was working on, but they weren't it. It had left the nest.
I think it's a phenomenon that happens to many creative people, whether it's actors wrapping up a show or a movie, or writers wrapping up, or even at the end of concerts, a musician going out playing a concert or a tour and it's over and you go into this lull because you were hyped up on the energy and you were living in that creative moment and moments, and then suddenly, like you said, it's gone. And it's like, okay, well, where do I go from here? What do I do next?
There's also that, like, were you an actor or a performer of any kind? Did you do theater?
No, I'm a musician mostly. I grew up playing violin and piano, but I use ukulele a lot now.
Oh, I haven't touched it yet. I do plan to try it out. I'm a former bass player, and by former, in my heart, I still am. I just haven't played in a while, so all of my skills are gone. But just sitting across from me is the bass guitar my mom bought me when I was 16 years old, and I've got two others upstairs, and I've got a guitar and a piano. I still love music with a very deep passion, but that wasn't where I was going. I just love hearing myself talk. There's always been this thing with theater when I've done theater, where when you're doing the play, this is your family. You're constantly with these people, and these relationships become really intense really fast. And the play ends and you load out and it's gone. And all of these relationships go with it. And it's not like people would treat you like a stranger. It's just where we were hanging out 6 days a week just last week. Now we're on to the next thing. And all of those relationships go away. So it's another aspect of that. Once the project is gone, this weird void comes into your life. And it's one of the strange things of the acting performance process. Now, when I did music, I did it in a band, and that's sort of like a violent marriage that goes on up until the point it stops. And of course, my guitar player is still one of my closest friends, but I've never been in where I was hired to perform music and there was a finite thing. Is it the same way with musicians, where we're an orchestra, we're a quartet, and then we stop being ones, but now we're not rehearsing it every other day, and now we're not friends, but we're not. It's now we have a new set of friends.
Yeah, I think at least in terms of professional musicians, you're always, for some soloists, it's a lonely existence and there's lots of travel. But for those who are blessed to be in a chamber group or an orchestra or a band, it's like you said, your family. And then when you all decide to retire and move on, it's something changes, something ends. And, I can only speak for being in like collegiate orchestras, for example, and you sort of have your own cliques within it. You hang out with certain people and you don't always associate with others, but you're all acquaintances. So it's really almost like a big club being in an orchestra, I think, because you don't all hang out together ever. Some people don't like other people, or it's very
why
interesting.
Does everybody hate why does everybody hate the violist? What did the violist do to anybody? When I was back in my band days, I worked at a record store, and one of the girls there was a harpist, and she invited me to a musician's party, and me and my guitar player went, and literally half the jokes were at the expense of the violist. And it was very strange to us because we're like, what did this poor person do to earn such derision? It's like, I can understand if they're actually, no, I'm not even going to say I couldn't understand under any circumstance, but it seemed like it didn't seem good natured. It seemed to be like there was teeth to this.
Because you've got violin, which is very popular, and then cello, which is a lovely deep sound. And then the viola is like a mixture of those two. It's the same kind of strings as a cello, but an octave higher, and then looking on a violin body, but larger. So it's a bit awkward. I mean, it's a gorgeous instrument.
Almost like the drummer jokes where, what do you call a guy who hangs out with a band? A drummer.
Yes, exactly. Well, speaking of music, what are some albums in your music collection that you feel spark creativity for you?
I listen to such a weird miasma of music that it's hard to say. I'm always out of time. I've never ever been in a scene as the scene was happening. So one of my favorite bands, all-time favorite bands, was Black Sabbath, but not because, like, one, I'm not old enough to have been involved with them at the time. Heard the song Iron Man. I was like a small child and I was watching professional wrestling, and that got me involved in music and metal. But the metal I liked was like Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, stuff like that. Then I got involved in punk, and that was the Misfits. But as I was growing up, it was like 80s and 90s music. So I've got a very deep connection to new wave music. And there's the Police, which came out of nowhere for me, and weird stuff like this band Marillion, and all this alternative tentacle, Dead Kennedys, but not the Dead Kennedys per se, but bands like DOA and a really weird Canadian band called No Means No. So, but then I got Guitar Hero at some point, and suddenly classic rock became my jam. And now I'm into Boston and Foreigner and Kansas and Styx. And I wasn't into them at the time. For some of that, I wasn't around again. It's not so much an album, but one of the things I find inspiring is some of the stuff that Rush does is cinematic. So it's not an album, but it's a song. And it's a song called The Manhattan Project. And it's not a good pop song. It's not, because it is not a pop song. But what it is it's a movie in song form. And it talks about the Manhattan Project. And the music itself takes you moment to moment through the dropping of the atomic bomb. And it's wonderful and it's brilliant. I mean, it's Rush. Of course, it's brilliant. You can't refer to Rush without talking about brilliance. Another thing that was very imagination sparking was Iron Maiden. And partially because if you're not into metal, you may just, Iron Maiden. But Iron Maiden, most of their songs, a lot of their songs was based around either literature or books or fantasy elements. And they talked about them. So an introduction to Dune for a lot of people would be the song To Tame a Land. Or probably there was a resurgence in the late 80s, early 90s of people reading Samuel Coleridge, the author of Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Kubla Khan, because of the song Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And they had a lot of stuff like that. It was very eye-opening. So I don't know that I've directly answered your question, but in my roundabout, long, talkative way, I did.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear what other people in creative careers like to listen to and how varied it is. And then also at times how many people mention some of the same bands. It's just interesting. So
when I was in my teens and getting into playing music or whatnot, I had this mindset that everybody, I think, around that time has, or a lot of people do, where if you like it, it's great. If you don't like it, it sucks. It just sucks. And I've later come to realize that that is, of course, absolutely not true. What it is there are, because generally speaking, most music that certainly back when there was a music industry to speak of and things were released on labels, even if it wasn't your music, even if it wasn't to your taste, it took a lot of work, effort, and skill to make this thing. Even if abjectly you felt that it wasn't your deal and it kind of sounded bad to you. I've come to realize later on that no, most things are really good just because it doesn't speak to you. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is I had mentioned a band called the Misfits. And the Misfits, from an objective standpoint, their production wasn't great. The songs were very simplistic, but they were all very, very fun. And they were an inspiration to me in the same way that occasionally I would like McDonald's French fries. In the same way, I just want to watch, people falling down on YouTube. It's not the greatest of media, but it can be inspiring. And then, of course, later on, they did get much better at their instruments and create some really interesting songs, but that's beside the point. Anyway, random thought for you.
Oh, it's a good point to make, just because something's not absolutely perfect or super in tune. I think of Bob Dylan, whose voice is really gravelly and not amazingly smooth like Frank Sinatra, but he wrote some really brilliant songs that speak to the times of that time.
Absolutely. Woody Guthrie is another one of those.
We're going to switch gears a little bit. You talked about books. What are some books that really inspired you? And then also, if you could be any fictional character, who would you be? As
far as books go, my humor, my sensibilities were shaped by two authors more than anybody else. So the first one would be Douglas Adams and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. When I was a child, I would go to my cousin's house and there was a book with this smiley planet on it. And for years I saw this book. And then one day I asked him if I could borrow it, and he just gave it to me. And I read it, and it had a phrase in it that was life-altering for me. The sentence went something like this: "The Vogon ship hung in the air in the exact same way that a brick does not." That turn of phrase, that way of presenting something, blew up my mind. It just totally and completely, that weird angle of seeing the world, how to present things, that redefined my humor. And then later on, I found Monty Python. So it totally, completely, later on, they would rent out these old warehouse stores that had closed down, and they'd just bring in tons of books that they'd sell at a really deep discount. So you could get any book you wanted for $5. There was a book called Small Gods by an author named Terry Pratchett. It was part of a series called Discworld. And it was like Douglas Adams, but a lot more topical on its levels of satire. And I ate up that entire series. And it just was a reinforcement of the Douglas Adams type humor. And those books just really set how I see the world and how I present my humor. So I present absurdity with grounded consequences. And that's what they did. So those were the books that really, really did it for me, those two authors. And then later on, Neil Gaiman, because his use of mythology and the fantastical world. As you can see, I really don't like living where I'm living. I want to live in other realms with slightly looser interpretations of physics.
That would be very interesting for sure.
Thus, most of the stuff I make. Fictional character I would like to be. I have never thought about which fictional character I would like to be, because in reading in their stories, you see their triumphs, but then their tragedies. Mm. And oftentimes, since they are characters in a book, their tragedies are pretty hard. You know what? Because I don't have a good answer to this, I'm going to give a terrible answer to this. And that terrible answer is this: I would like to be Chopper from Rebels in the Star Wars universe. I would like to be this cranky, grungy, attitude-filled droid that just powerhouses his way through everything. He is the anti-R2-D2. He influences so many things in very negative ways. I'd like to be him. He has an awesome existence. That's what I would like out of life. I would be arrested so fast if I had his personality.
That's funny. There you go. I mean, go out with a bang, right?
Yes. Clearly, I have emotional issues I need to work through.
So you were talking before about Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. So I assume you're a fan of The Good Omens?
I have ruined several of those books, yes. I have. I reread Good Omens every couple years. I loved it. It was a very interesting interpretation of the end times. Love it. Absolutely. And thought it was very well cast. It was interesting because I think the miniseries was both a success and not quite a success because there was so much they were trying to condense in, and some of it just didn't work because some of it can only work in book form, but they tried it in ways that you don't normally happen. I think Neil Gaiman as a showrunner did a very good job. And Michael Sheehan, as I can't pronounce the angel's name, was inspired casting. He was brilliant. I mispronounced his name. Sheen.
I think it's Sheen.
Michael Sheen.
Yeah, him and David Tennant are just a hoot together. Absolutely brilliant.
Wonderful chemistry. You absolutely bought them as people who were supposed to be enemies, and yet because they were the only two people who understood what they were dealing with for millennia, they were their best friends.
Yes, the casting was definitely superb there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I love it. Love it. Is there a question, or are we just gonna like? Because
I'm
happy to tell you how much I love it.
I was just curious because you'd mentioned those authors, and I thought, oh, I bet he's read Good Omens.
I've read Good Omens. What would be if you were to suggest to me, whom because of all the stuff I'm doing right now, watches very little TV, but if I'm going to make an hour to watch what you tell me to watch, what am I watching?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I'm gonna want to steal that for future interviews, but
I said I was good at the interviewing thing.
Right? So I think for me, because I absolutely love British comedy, there is a spin-off of a comedy show. So there's two comedy shows called Chewin' the Fat, which is a Scottish comedy show, sketch show. And then a spin-off of that called Still Game. And it's these two comedic actors, Greg Hempel and Ford Kiernan, and then a few of their other castmates. And they all are aged with makeup to be like older persons. And so it's a comedy about older persons in a very tiny town in Scotland and all the hijinks that they get up to.
Interesting. Still Game.
Really, really funny. And if you're not familiar with the Scottish dialect, you have to turn on the captions for a while until you get it, because they speak really fast and really beautifully and they're broke. If you like Monty Python, you're gonna love it.
Monty Python. I discovered Monty Python on PBS. I was like 10 or 11. It was probably it was the first time I saw nudity on TV. It was also it was the first time for a lot of things for me. And as a 10 or 11-year-old, it just totally, again, much like the turn of phrase, it totally blew my mind, and I loved it. My favorite film to this day is Life of Brian. Such a bold choice and such a brilliant satire without actually touching the actual subject. Can't recommend that one enough.
Yeah. No, they're really great. And do you feel like that shaped your comedy as an actor and a podcaster?
Absolutely. Well, as a podcaster, not quite yet. I haven't dropped a 10-ton weight on any of my guests yet, though. There's one or two of them that I'm definitely planning on trying it with. Coming for you, Mikey. Let's see you on my next episode. But it's definitely shaped my comedy. I think to some degree, it actually shaped my worldview a little bit because I have difficulty giving too much credence to most authority figures. I'm not an anarchist, don't get me wrong, but I've always felt that way. And I felt that way towards my bosses. There's always been in the back of my head that this person is probably some ridiculous character who doesn't actually fully know what they're talking about. And I probably did get that from Monty Python. That might not be the most, from a citizen standpoint, the most healthy lesson to take from Monty Python, but it was one of them that I did. One of the things that externally isn't necessarily apparent to a lot of people who saw them, certainly not in my mom's generation, who just referred to them as a bunch of druggies, which is hilarious because none of them were, is there was a lot of intelligence and a lot of thought. These were highly educated. One of them was never practiced, but one of them was a doctor. One of them was going to be a lawyer, and that was Cleese. These were incredibly intelligent people dropping 10-ton weights on people and chasing people with point head sticks. And this parrot is no more. It has ceased to be. These, I think, and simply because you haven't asked, who my favorite Python has changed throughout the years. Originally, it was Eric Idle, but in the end, it was Terry Jones.
Hmm.
Not only because he was a very driven, forceful personality, and it didn't necessarily play that much on screen, but if I were to be in a Monty Python type group, he would be the role I fulfilled. I would be the Terry Jones of that group. So thank you for asking that question.
Oh, you're very welcome. That's a good question to ask too. Is
which Python would you be?
Yeah, that's right. Which Python would you be?
You feel free to rip me off as much as you want to.
There you go. I'll just steal all your questions.
Cool.
And speaking of questions, we've come to the end. So the last question is, and it's more of a serious one. What does living a creative life mean to you?
Living a creative life isn't really a choice or an option for me. So in doing so, it means that oftentimes I am courting frustration when things aren't working out, or even when they do work out, it seems like it goes under the radar and unnoticed. It sometimes makes it a little more difficult to relate to an average person who doesn't have these creative drives. It seems to make me more of a daydreamer than may or may not be conducive for just somebody trying to get by in society. But also it makes me incredibly unique. It makes me me. And if there's one thing that I have, no matter the ups and downs, I enjoy the person that I am at. I enjoy the fact that I can have some weird random thought and develop it into something that lives and breathes and I find engaging and beautiful. If I wasn't creative, if it wasn't for me being creative, I probably would be alone, because it was through my creativity that I was able and continue to be able, because I am not shy, just I am coping with it through what it ultimately ends up being a creative means. So I think that's the answer.
It sounds like creativity is everything for you, your whole universe, so to speak.
When I stopped having my band, and for a couple years, and all I was doing was working, it was a very choice job, especially for somebody who was like 20 years old, working for this military research company doing at the time this multimedia thing where I was just building stuff. I was getting paid well, but I was dying inside because I had no creative outlet and nothing was happening. And without it, I don't know how to be.
And I think that sums up so many people, even if they're not necessarily in a creative field, they find in their day-to-days, find ways to insert creativity, because it's part of what makes life so beautiful. Having that creative outlet is really a beacon.
And also just having the pains of your world being shown to you in an absurdist way, or it's in a way to make you understand that it's not just you. It's not just you.
Excellent. What a wonderful sentiment to end on, Bruce. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. Listeners, please check out his podcast, The Fittest Fat Kid. There will be links in the show notes so that you can go and shower his podcast with lots of listens. Thanks and have a great day. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.